Okay, I think we'll get started, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk with you regarding continuing competence program submissions and what you need to know and think about with regard to completing your CCP as one of the components of registration renewal for 2026, which will be here before we know it. My name is Susan Raffet, and I'm Deputy Registrar at ACSLPA. And joining me today is Renee Phillips, ACSLPA's Audiology Advisor.
Hi, everyone. Very pleased to be here with you today and presenting alongside Susan.
Great. So I am just going to move us along to our agenda for today, which is outlined on this slide. We're going to start with a little bit of background review regarding the CCP, tips and strategies to ensure your success with your submissions, some sample or example submissions that might be helpful as you consider how you're going to provide your information this year. A short word on the audits and the interviews, and then we'll open it up for a bit of a Q&A session as well. So please feel free to ask whatever you have on your mind in relation to the CCP at that point. I'm also, or both Renee and I are happy to entertain questions as they come up in relation to specific slides. But I would just ask that you enter your questions in the chat, and then we will kind of keep an eye on the chat. I won't actually be able to see it, but Renee will, and Paula, our regulatory coordinator, can speak up. One of them will speak up to let us know if a question has been entered, and we can address anything that's specific to a slide as we go.
Susan, there is just a quick question in the chat. It says, will these slides be available for review? And I don't believe they will, but this session is being recorded. Is that correct?
Yes, the sessions are always recorded, and then within about a day or so, they're uploaded to our YouTube channel. So you should be able to access the full presentation on the YouTube channel, in short order, I would say. All right. So we'll just move along then to the next slide, and this is a bit of the background that I mentioned. This slide speaks to the audit of continuing competence program submissions from the past year, and we'll walk through this slide. So overall, the number of submissions that were missing information and hence were referred to the interview stage of the CCP was considerably less than the year prior, which is great news. And to see a detailed comparison of the numbers from 2024 to 2025, you can take a look at the Insights article on the CCP that is posted on the ACSLPA website. But I'll speak to a few of those numbers in just a moment. First off, though, I'll mention that the total number of regulated members audited in a given year is in line with the expectation that approximately 20% of registrants will be audited each year, so that over a 5-year period, all registrants will have been audited. And you'll note here that the numbers are a bit higher than 20%. Actually, we're 25% for SLPs, 27% for audiologists this past year, because we automatically also audit all new registrants who have just completed their first continuing competence submission, as we want to ensure that new folks get the support that they need in terms of completing the CCP so that they're successful going forward. And we also review a small percentage of submissions for completion purposes. So just to confirm that there are actually sensible answers entered, and that it's not just words or letters or numbers or something like that have been entered. So in terms of a comparison between this year and last year, submissions where there were questions about meeting requirements of the audit of the program that went to interview were only 11% of all of the programs that were audited, compared to 21% of those audited the year before. And there are several factors that may have impacted this decrease in numbers being referred to interview. One of those factors could be that we completed some revisions to our CCP reporting forms last year to improve their overall clarity. And those revisions were based on feedback from all of you following last year's audit. We also, this past year, the auditors provided feedback to regulated members in the form of recommendations for future submissions versus always referring somebody to the interview, particularly for less significant items. So for example, if there was missing reference information regarding a continuing education activity, but the actual reflection was complete, then the auditor might have just suggested to think about more detailed references for next year instead of actually referring that person on for an interview. So those were a couple of factors that might have explained why our referral rate from audit to interview was less this past year. Just a reminder that if you want to go back and check the feedback that you received, if you were audited last year, you can do so by entering the ACSLPA portal and clicking on My Documents under the left-hand menu. And you can also see your prior CCP submissions under the My Learning tab. So if you want to see prior submissions, you can look under My Learning. And if you want to check an audit report, if you have been audited previously, you can look under My Documents, both in the ACSLPA portal. In terms of who completes the interviews, we involved 2 ACSLPA staff, myself and Renee, and 2 regulated members who completed reviews on a contractual basis for ACSLPA, one of whom was an SLP and one of whom was an audiologist. Finally, on this slide, you can see that the percentage of interviews that were referred to the next stage of the CCP was actually 0 again this year. Last year it was also 0. So you see that we have the total number of members who were audited, then we have the total number of members who were referred from the audit to an interview, and then we have the total number of members that were referred from the interview to a record review, and that is the 0 number on this slide. So from there, that's sort of a background about stats on the CCP from the last year. I'd like to now just move us into spending a few minutes sharing some tips that will contribute to a successful CCP submission for the future. So tip number 1 is we ask that you please provide complete reference information in your continuing education report. So the continuing education report is one component of the CCP, and that's where we ask you to report on 2 different continuing education activities you completed in the year. And we ask you to provide that background about the type of continuing education activity that you participated in. And in this situation, we really need specifics. We'd like you to provide enough information that if someone wanted to find the resource that you reviewed, they would be able to do so. And so that would mean the author of an article or of a presentation, the title, the date of a presentation or of a webinar that you attended, the location, perhaps even the URL if it is a webinar or some information from a website. Honestly, the more information, the better in this regard, because it serves as an accountability mechanism. And if a reviewer is interested in looking at that documentation, then they know how to find it. In terms of tip number 2, we would ask that you please spell out acronyms the first time they're used in your submission. And you might be surprised to see this suggestion, as you might think we probably all do write out acronyms in full before we make use of them throughout a submission, but you'd actually be surprised at the number of submissions we receive where there's no explanation of what a particular acronym might refer to. And I think that's probably because some acronyms do just become second nature to us if we've worked in a particular practice area for some time. But given the variety of practice areas where SLPs and audiologists work, our reviewers might not always be aware of the particular acronyms that are commonplace in your practice setting. So again, please just spell out those acronyms the first time they're used in your submission. That really helps out the reviewers. In terms of tip number 3, this is probably the most important tip, which is to really ask yourself these important questions and attempt to answer them in your reflections. How did this activity impact my competence and what I do in my practice? And here, just to really keep it as simple as you can, write down your response to the questions. Sometimes the answer to the question is not evident when a reviewer goes to look at a submission. So we really would ask you to draw the link between the activity you completed and what you learned. Make it explicit for the reviewer. And this is where we'll walk through a few examples of submissions to assist in understanding what this looks like. And I will also remind folks that we have several examples of effective submissions available on our website as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Renee now, who's going to walk us through a few slides here.
Thanks, Susan. So this slide is just a reminder really of the 3 separate components of the CCP submission. All 3, of course, are required to be completed. We just wanted to include this snapshot, I guess, as a quick refresher for most people, but also as an overview for anyone who may not have already completed the process in the past. So the CCP submission firstly consists of the continuing education report, where you need to reflect on at least 2 continuing education activities you've completed throughout the year, and Susan touched on this. And the second is the peer dialogue reflection. This is where you explain a situation that you discussed with a peer. And a peer means, you know, a colleague of the same or different disciplines, supervisors, mentors, managers, and the like. And then you go on to report the learning obtained from that interaction and how you integrated the learning into your practice or how it shaped your competence. And just a point here on this component of the CCP, which was highlighted in some of the submissions from last year, is that the peer dialogue reflection is, you know, about your own learning, your personal learning, what you took away from it, as opposed to describing a situation where perhaps you were the one offering support or supervision to someone else. So just remembering it's a conversation where you were the one to receive, you know, learn something, take something away, receive feedback on something in particular. And then the third component is the risks and supports profile. This section asks you to identify factors that may negatively affect your practice or competence, those being risks, and to reflect on at least one supportive strategy that you have in place to help mitigate that risk. Okay, so in the next 2 slides, you'll see an audiology sample that relates to the first component of the CCP, so the continuing education report. Here, the description of the activity offers a nice summary of the audiologist practice context. So they've said, I spent time with several different audiologists at X workplace, shadowing and occasionally assisting them with patients. This would involve hearing assessment, patient counselling, equipment adjustment, and cochlear implant evaluations. My experience provided me the opportunity to work with and see clients who were both happy and unhappy with their cochlear implants. So by including details about the workplace context, the types of patients they were working with, and the activities and assessments they completed, it just sets the stage nicely for a reflection about the learning that took place from the activity they identified. Importantly, providing a clear overview of the activity ensures that a reviewer who may be looking at your submission has the necessary context to understand its link to your learning, which we will have a look at now in the next sample. Sorry, in the same sample. Okay, so the follow-up question in the continuing education report asks how you applied or plan to apply what you learnt from the activity to your professional practice. The first section of the sample, highlighted in yellow here, captures the key learning this audiologist took away from the experience. So my time at X Workplace showed me the benefits of cochlear implants, CIs, in helping understanding and improving the social life of individuals who received them. It also provided me the opportunity to interact with patients unhappy with the CI and how to approach counselling. And the next highlighted section illustrates how learning about the benefits of cochlear implants and engaging with clients who had both positive and negative experiences influenced changes in their professional practice. So this allowed me to be more confident in setting realistic expectations with patients or their parents about what CIs can do and in what circumstances a CI consult is warranted. I have learnt to be careful not to lay judgment on individuals or families who choose not to proceed with a CI and instead to focus on educating the family on what options are available. So you can see how they clearly identified the impact to their practice, specifically noting changes to their intervention approach and client interactions going forward. And they also defined abbreviations they use, despite how common they may feel or be, which was mentioned in our tips earlier. And this time, over the next two slides, we'll look at another audiology sample, which relates to the peer dialogue reflection. Initially, you're asked to describe the situation discussed with the peer and other details such as the peer's role, just to give a bit of context behind the conversation, and importantly, refraining from using any names to maintain confidentiality. In this example, the audiologist explains the background of a situation that prompted the peer dialogue, where upon their own reflection, they realised they couldn't be confident that adequate masking levels were applied when they were presenting during an assessment due to several factors. And their initial response was to arrange another appointment as soon as possible to address that concern. However, from the peer dialogue description, we can see that there was a change in the audiologist's practice in how they scheduled the appointment to complete that outstanding assessment. So they said, when I discussed this with my supervisor, he indicated it would be preferable to conduct the masking retesting alongside the client's upcoming fitting appointment. The discussion I had with my supervisor has improved my working efficiency. I now seek to integrate outstanding tasks into pre-existing appointments rather than scheduling new ones. Having fewer appointments in my schedule has resulted in reduced wait times for clients booking appointments, greater profitability for my employer, and increased efficiency for my clinical practice. Here, the audiologist noted how the feedback led to a practice change, which resulted in improved efficiency, benefiting both them and the client, who then didn't need to return for a third appointment. And in this example, although the audiologist's skills didn't necessarily change, their practice was enhanced, which is also a component of clinical competence. So I'll pass the baton back to Susan to speak about some SLP examples.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this sample submission is focused on the peer dialogue again, but from an SLP perspective. And again, I think this provides a solid foundation in terms of context for the peer dialogue and what the feedback from the peer mentor included. So describing the situation that was discussed with the peer, the SLP spoke about recently assessing a child that exhibited some social communication differences consistent with autism. They spoke to the parent about what they saw and suggested a referral for a neurodevelopmental assessment. And although receptive to their observations, the parent indicated they weren't concerned and did not want further assessment. So the SLP then asked for their colleagues' feedback and asked if she would have done anything differently. And the colleague reassured this individual they did enough for the first step and leaving it open for future conversation, but also shared that she would first ask parents what they know about autism so she can provide information where needed. And that sometimes by doing that with parents who are perhaps not receptive to the idea but didn't know much about autism, they would benefit from a conversation about common misconceptions, etc. So this sets the stage for what the learning for the SLP who wrote this up was. And if we look at the next slide, the question is, how have you applied or will you apply what you learned from this dialogue? The reflection provides some key takeaways that the regulated member obtained from the peer dialogue, things that she will consider and implement in the future with similar clients. So she talks about having a beginning conversation about referrals for neurodevelopmental assessment by first asking parents what they know about autism, learning more about their perceptions of autism so that she can better understand where parents are coming from, and then can provide the amount of education that she thinks would be necessary for the parent to understand where she is coming from as an SLP, and that this would facilitate more effective and open communication. So this is the type of thing we're really looking for in a reflection. So it's clear that learning has taken place and the reflection addresses what the benefits of this different approach to interacting with parents might be. I'll also share another sample submission, which is a continuing education report submission. And this submission is a non-clinical example of a continuing education activity. So this is what we would call more of an administrative or for somebody who's maybe working in administration or in teaching or in that kind of thing. And again, the details provide a context for the learning that the regulated member discusses on the next slide. So the context here is that the regulated member is providing a presentation or an in-service to others. And through that activity, they're learning something for themselves in terms of their own competence as a presenter. So this is she's serving as a presenter for practice sessions in preparation for the launch of new software. And in terms of details, after the end users had attended their training sessions and had some practice in a play environment, they were invited to attend the session, and the session provided a guided review of therapist activities in the software. Participants were encouraged to ask questions along the way, and demonstrations of system functionality were provided. So in terms of this regulated members learning, then they've answered the question, how have you applied or will you apply what you've learned from this activity of serving as a presenter? They had to complete some research to get prepared for the presentation. It says that this research increased their knowledge of system function, as well as where to find the resources that would support the end users. They were able to take the knowledge from the research and their previous experience to guide users in how to use the system, as well as help them know where to find additional information. And it increased their comfort level with navigating the system, as well as with testing workflows out in the playground before providing support to users in the live environment. And it also increased their knowledge of content experts to whom they could reach out for help in answering questions from end users. So this highlighted information speaks to the learning that they obtained by participating in this activity. I'm going to turn it back over to Renee now to address this next slide.
Okay, so this is our last sample. We've included which relates to the potential risks to one's practice. And this section corresponds to the third component of the CCP, so the risks and supports profile. In this sample, the identified risk you can see is lack of clinical exposure. And the SLP explains why this identified risk is relevant to them. They've said I've had only a handful of stuttering fluency clients over the past 5 to 10 years. This means I have less practice opportunity and can lose sight of current best practice within this realm. Notably, only one support is required to meet minimum requirements in this section. However, the SLP describes 2 supports they have in place here. So the first being that they have colleagues who have fluency experience, which provides them with a resource for when the situation arises that they have their own fluency client. And the second, that the SLP's workplace has made current resources relating to fluency available, which they can refer to. So that was just a summary of a handful of samples you might find helpful to refer to when you're completing your submission. And as Susan already mentioned, there are several available on the ACSLPA website as well if you'd like to review more.
And before I move to the next slide, I'd just like to thank the members who agreed to allow us to use their submissions. These are actual submissions from regulated members. And I think they provide just helpful information for what an effective submission can look like.
And our final tip, our 4th tip for a successful CCP submission is provided on this slide. So record your activities as they happen during the year. And this will ensure you don't forget about activities that did provide you with good opportunities for learning and reflection. You can enter the MyACSLPA portal throughout the year anytime to add a continuing education activity or a peer dialogue reflection too.
Great, thank you, Renee. So I also wanted just to remind folks that as reported in a recent ACSLPA Essentials, I think it was in July perhaps, or August, we have beefed up our section on accommodations, which can be found both in the CCP manual and on the ACSLPA website under our newly developed Competence Corner section. So if you think you might benefit from an accommodation in terms of how you submit your CCP, or if you might need to request an exemption for a particular year, we urge you to take a look at this section of the website. And you can access it from the ACSLPA homepage under members and then the continuing competence program. And just a reminder that if you're looking for an accommodation, we do require at least 5 days notice prior to providing a response. So please plan accordingly. Waiting until the last day of renewal, so December 31st, will not allow enough time to process a request for an accommodation, and it will be denied. So you can contact us at ccp@acslpa.ca if you'd like to discuss your CCP submission, or if you feel you need additional support in relation to your submission, or if you feel you need an accommodation, you can contact us as well. Just in terms of timelines for this year, renewal is scheduled to open on November 3rd, barring any changes, and will close on December 31st. And as always, we encourage regulated members to enter the system well in advance of the deadline so you can take the time you need to complete your competence submission. And while our program has been streamlined to reduce the amount of time it takes to complete all the components, you will still find that you're going to need time to reflect and to compose your responses. And if there are any technical difficulties, it's much better to have time to contact the office rather than be in a panic that your renewal might be stuck in limbo and you have to wait until 2026 to get those difficulties resolved. If your renewal is not resolved in 2025, you may not be able to work until things are resolved in 2026, which of course could be problematic. So please, as always, give yourself the time to complete your renewal and your competence program well in advance of the deadline. Audits typically begin in February, and that's just an unavoidable feature of our system. We have a lot of follow-up and processing that needs to take place with registration in January, and then in February, we will typically get going with the audits and the follow-up in terms of interviews, etc. So I think I'll close with a few comments on audits and on interviews. We work really hard to ensure that the audits and the interviews are well organized, that they're supportive to members, and they're transparent in terms of the requirements of the program and the learnings for regulated members. And I know it can be intimidating to think that your program is going to be reviewed or it has been reviewed and you might need to talk to somebody about it. Our intent is not to have it be intimidating, but to work with regulated members just to have conversations and work through this information. Audits are completed by regulated members who sit on ACSLPA's competence committee, as well as by ACSLPA staff, that being Renee and myself, who are also regulated members of the college. Regulated members whose submissions have been audited will be informed following completion of the audit, and you will receive a copy of the audit form that tells you whether your submission met requirements or whether more information is required. And we like to talk about, rather than talking about how many members passed or failed the audit, we really prefer to talk about whether submissions have met requirements and needing to have an interview to gather more information about a submission, because that's really what this is all about. Reviewers do make use of the scoring rubric that's available on the ACSLPA website when we make determinations of whether a submission meets requirements or whether an interview is needed to gather more information. In terms of the interview portion of the program, interviews are completed by regulated members who've received training from the college and by ACSLPA staff who are regulated members of the college. Interviewers are focused on providing a supportive and positive experience where the purpose is to gather more information about your learning, including mechanisms to support practice and to mitigate any risks. And I will just say that a post-interview feedback that we obtained in 2025 revealed a really high satisfaction rate with all elements of the interview process, and which was really great to see. So at this point, I would like to open it up now to any questions that you might have with regard to the information shared or with regard to the CCP more generally. And you can please just enter your questions in the chat, and Renee and I will work to answer any questions that you have.
So Karen had one question, which is, can the subject of your peer dialogues be on something different than the two continuing education activities, or must it relate to those? And the short answer is no, they can be different. You know, what you complete as your continuing education activities might be quite different to what you require a, you know, peer dialogue reflection on. And yeah, I guess none of them need to relate, and the continuing education activities can also be on different topics as well. So it is up to the individual. Hopefully that answers your question, Karen. I don't know if you have anything to add, Susan. That covers it.
I think you nailed it.
I don't see any more questions in the chat currently.
Give people maybe a couple minutes if there is anything else. There, as we've said, there are a lot of resources for members and available on our website, and maybe I'll just talk through those while we see if there are any more questions. In terms of resources, you'll see the link to the website. We have the rubric that is used for scoring kind of and reviewing programs when they're audited. We have the sample or example submissions, not the ones that we talked about today, but other ones that are available on the website. And we also have frequently asked questions that you can review. ACSLPA staff is available to answer questions about the general process and content. And you can use the Contact Us link on the ACSLPA website, and you'll be directed to the appropriate staff who can try and answer your questions on things. We're also available to assist with troubleshooting should you be in the process of completing your renewal and any IT kinds of issues arise. And for those kinds of questions, we suggest you contact registration at ACSLPA.ca instead of the CCP at ACSLPA.ca. And our amazing regulatory coordinators will be available to answer questions and troubleshoot with you. And yeah, so I think that covers kind of the resources piece.
There's another question as well. Does the peer dialogue need to be absolutely related to the continuing competence learning?
And again, I think the answer is no. I mean, you can have your continuing education report on things that you've worked on, and then your peer dialogue reflection might be something very different. Often it isn't. I mean, often it's very similar because what's top of mind for you, likely, in the learning you're doing is also something you're going to be interested in talking about with a peer, right? So they can be related, definitely, and they often are. But it could be something different that's come up that you felt like you learned a lot from having had a conversation with a peer. So I don't think you have to limit yourselves. I mean, really just to find things that are meaningful in terms of learning that you obtained during the year.
Jennifer's question is, do professional learning sessions have to be completed within the calendar year? Could a professional learning session attended in late December 2024 and reported on with this year's CCP submission be reported on, perhaps?
I think our preference would be that it be in the calendar year, because the idea is that every year you are doing things to improve your competence or maintain your competence, right? So if, I mean, most people, I think, would be doing learning, more than one learning item in a year, so they should be able to comment on something from the current year. I suppose if you were in a real crunch and you felt there was really good learning from something that happened very close to the end of one year, you might be able to make a case for that. But where possible, I would say keep it within that calendar year. Would you agree with that, Renee?
I think so. I think it's easier to just keep it current with the year that you complete your CCP.
I'll just flip over to this final slide then.
One more, sorry.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Sherry, how do we keep our answers succinct within the numbers of characters allowed in our responses if you have gone to a 3-day conference?
I think you need to pick specific elements, what you're talking about, right? So you might have gone to a 3-day conference if that's what you're using for your continuing education report. I would pick some key elements from there that are particularly pertinent to you and your learning and focus on those. Because the purpose here is to see that there's been some specific learning. It's not for us to know about everything you've done in a year. And I think sometimes that's hard. I think we all want to share everything we've done, but that's not what we're asking for. So.
Great.
Okay, then I think we will leave things there. As we mentioned, the webinar does get posted on our YouTube channel, and you can certainly look at it. You can encourage your colleagues to look at it. And then there's all the resources available on the website. And certainly if there are specific questions, you can use the contact us link, and one of the staff will get back to you in response to any questions you might have. It's been a pleasure again, and we thank you for your time today. I know everyone's really busy, so much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone.